when did you actually last sit down and create? Not content, not product photos or captions about your process, but just make something. And if your answer is a while ago, I don't think that's because you've lost your love for it. I reckon it's because your week is so packed with stuff that isn't the actual making. Most of the parts that are running your creative business have become so ingrained in your day that you don't even clock it as the thing that's eating your creative time. So today, I want to walk through 5 things that are stealing that time and the 5 shifts that actually get that back. Not by working more hours or by getting up at 4 a.m., but by really looking at where the time is going. So if you're watching this, the chances are you started this whole thing for the love of creating. You didn't get into this for spreadsheets or product descriptions or figuring out the perfect flat lay for a product photo, unless of course you're a photographer. But then the business happened, and somewhere along the way, the creating has gotten smaller and smaller. And a lot of you are probably blaming yourselves for that, like thinking that you've lost your motivation or your passion or your discipline. But I really don't think that that is what's happening. And that's what today is all about. So let's get into shift 1. Name what's actually stealing your time. So shift 1 might feel like a boring one, but stick with me. So you feel exhausted at the end of the week, you feel behind, like there's just no time to create. But if I asked you to tell me hour by hour where last week's time actually went, you probably couldn't. And I genuinely couldn't have either until I started really paying attention. So a few years back, I used to run these Patreon goodie boxes, proper curated little parcels that land on subscribers' doorsteps. And I wanted them to feel really, really special. So I started making a load of stuff to go in, made by hand. And one round, I made 40 pencil cases by hand. Now, I sublimated the fabric, I sewed in the zips, the lining, the whole shebang. And behind the proper perfectionist that I am, each one took a minimum of 2 hours from start to finish. And that was with setting up a production line as well. So that's at least 80 hours on the pencil cases alone. And that was before I'd even started on the rest of the box. And somewhere in between all of that, there was also the admin, the content creation to promote the theme of the next box. And I just felt absolutely shattered at the end of every subscription that I made. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I never stopped to think about it. I just kept powering on. And I know that so many of you are in the middle of that right now. Nobody fully understands it until they're in the middle of it. But selling your work doesn't just add the job of selling to your week. It adds about 15 jobs that you didn't see coming. And those jobs aren't announced and you then start putting them into your schedule. They just creep up on you and just sort of appear in your day. And that meant that the time I was creating shrunk to almost nothing. And I started wondering how I ever had the time to be creative. So I don't think you've lost your creativity. I think that by the time you've done everything else, you've got nothing left to give. So to make this video or podcast episode, wherever you're listening, actually actionable, I want you to try tracking your week. Actually write down where your time is going. Is it listings, photography, email time, packing time, content time, whatever your version of all of this looks like? Because once you can see the areas that are draining your time, but not necessarily like bringing in results, you can start making some changes. And that brings us to shift 2. What to actually do with all of that work once you've realized where your time is going. So shift 2 can change your whole week. So I want to spend a couple of minutes on it because I think it's the most underrated fix in the way that people run their creative businesses. So every time you switch between modes, your brain has to work extra hard to keep up. That's real mental energy wasted when it really doesn't need to. So creating artwork or whatever it is that you make is one mode, writing a product description is another, then switching to photography or emailing a customer, maybe filming a reel. every time you flick between tasks, your brain has to rewire. And studies show that this is true. So by the end of your working day, you're absolutely shattered and you can't really understand why, because on paper, you didn't even do that much. Except you did, because your brain switched between about 15 different modes, and that can be a real cost. And I just know that that's how a lot of us creatives work. The fix is going to take practice to put into place. And as creatives, it's not easy to get into this rhythm, but with any skill, it takes time to pick up. And that is batching. Maybe Mondays are dedicated listing days, or you set a chunk of time aside for your filming work and you do not edit that footage until you're in your editing batching session that you've pre-planned in your calendar. And when you start batching and you can finally get ahead of yourself, which by the way might take a few months to get to that point, but once you're properly streamlining your days and most of your work is batched ahead of schedule, that is when you can actually find the time to create. And I appreciate that we don't all have an entire Monday just for listings. I certainly don't, with 3 small children at home. But if we can streamline the limited time that we have, we're gonna get much more out of it. So it's not about how many hours you have, it's about whether the hours you've got are optimized. 2 hours of clean, uninterrupted creative time will beat 4 hours of broken time where you're flipping between 5 different jobs. So the question isn't how do I find more hours in my week, it's how do I protect the hours that I've already got, which means we need to talk about where everything in your business actually lives. Because you can batch all you want, but if you can't find what you need when you sit down to do it, you're back to chaos mode. So shift 3 is about what happens when there's nowhere in your business to hold anything. And most of us don't even realize that that's what's missing. We just think that we're bad at planning. So here's what that might look like in real life. Say you've got to launch something, like you've got a product idea or a collection that you want to get out there, or something you've been meaning to properly push for months, but every time you sit down to actually plan it, there's nowhere for it to live. Like there's no home for the idea, there's no place to put the steps into making a plan to actually promote it. So what ends up happening is you just wing it. You post stuff, hope someone bites, post some more, and then when the launch doesn't land the way you'd hoped, you don't even know why. Was it the product, the timing, the way you promoted it? You genuinely can't tell because there's no plan to look back at or nowhere to reflect. So you just shelve it and move on. And then the next launch goes exactly the same way. Let me know in the comments if you have felt this way, because I feel like I'm just describing exactly what I was feeling when I started my business. And I just know that if I felt it, then others feel it too. And that's when I realized the problem that most creatives have isn't a lack of ideas about how to organize their business. It's about those ideas and plans for their systems not having a home, so they never compound. So I started looking for something specifically for creatives just like us, and I couldn't find it. So in a very unusual turn of events that I did not see coming and I could not have predicted, I accidentally became a software developer. This is something actionable that you can use in your day-to-day running of your business, and it's called Artova. You might have heard me talking about it in a previous video. There's now a free trial, so you can see it before any commitment. And I think I just really want you to know that my goal and vision for this space is to make it the best possible place for creatives to grow. So go have a look. It's artova.io, and I'll leave it linked in the description. Okay, so we've talked about having systems and how they can save you time so that you can spend more time on actually creating. Now let's move on to shift 4, which is something that I definitely struggled with. Setting a boundary on good enough. So shift 4 is the one I see all the time, and it's the one that I see creators naming as a problem, and that's perfectionism. We've been told our whole lives that being detail obsessed is a good thing for an artist, which it can be, but that detail, that obsession applied to the business bits of the business will eat into your week and you won't even notice it happening. Let me give you a really specific example with my email marketing. So I was spending hours on them, properly hours, getting the layout right, the colors, the sections, the little branded header. It had to look a certain way before I'd send it. And I genuinely thought that that was the right thing to do, that people would appreciate the effort and the artistry in it. And then one week, I just didn't have the time. So I sent a plain email, just words, no layout, no design, no fuss. And I nearly didn't send it because it felt too simple, but my open rate went up. People actually replied to it and more people read it than usual. And that was a bit of a wake-up call because I realized that the layout I'd been spending hours on wasn't helping. If anything, it was actually getting in the way because people don't need a perfectly designed newsletter. They just wanted to hear from me. And the same is true for so much of the business stuff. That 47th tweak to your caption doesn't move the needle, or the 8th version of your product photo probably looked the same as the 3rd attempt you did. At some point, good enough really is good enough. And that time you save goes straight back into the actual creating. So shift 4 is just this. Give the business tasks a time limit and stick to it. 30 minutes for emails, 20 minutes for a product photo, maybe 15 for a caption. And when the timer goes, it's done. Because done is always better than perfect. And perfect is usually just another word for procrastination. So shift 5. You've worked on fixing what's stealing your time. Maybe you've started batching the bits that were draining you and you've got a system that holds everything in one place, and now there's actually a bit of space in your week. So what do you do with it? You get creating again. But the problem I see, and I have been guilty of this myself, is that you need to protect your creative time the same way that you protect everything else in your creative business. Because when there's suddenly a gap in your week, what happens is you fill it with more admin, more emails, more scrolling, because we are so conditioned to try and be productive that unstructured creative time sometimes just makes us feel guilty because we should be doing something more useful with it. But that creative time is definitely not wasted time. It's the whole point. That's what this has all been building towards. So before your week fills up or you jump into your inbox and start adding to the multiplying to-do list, put creative time in the calendar first. Not at the end of the week as a reward for getting everything else done, but first. And I don't mean you need to block out entire days. I'm not saying you need 3 hours of uninterrupted studio time to make it count, but even 20 minutes properly protected in the diary with the phone face down is worth way more than 4 hours of broken time where you're half creating and half thinking about everything else that you should be doing. Now, I know that some of you will have watched my video where I said that you need to be a content creator first and an artist second. And out of context, that doesn't sound very appealing, right? And what I'm about to say might feel like a contradiction to that. So I just want to address it really quickly. If you haven't watched that video, go and watch it. I'll link it below, because what I meant by that is so much more nuanced than it sounds in a single sentence. But if you have watched it, you might be sitting there thinking, hang on, you told me to prioritize content and now you're telling me to switch off and just create. And the honest answer is yes, both things are true and it's a balancing act. Ideally, if you can sit down for a creative session and switch on the camera at the same time, brilliant. That means you're building your content library and creating in one go. That's the dream, but that's not always how it works. And I don't think that every creative session needs to become content. Some weeks you might film, some weeks you might just draw or make or sketch with no agenda and no camera camera, and that is okay too. Because a creative business that never actually makes space for the creating, that's not sustainable. The content creator side of you needs the artist side of you to stay alive. They feed each other. So yes, content creator first, artist second, but that only works if you're actually protecting the artist too. And I know that for some of you, the idea of blocking out creative time in your calendar sounds great in theory, but in practice, creativity doesn't work like that. I'm one of those people who can't just switch creative mode on because the calendar says that Tuesday 2 p.m. is drawing time. If I'm not in the mood, the artwork never turns out how I imagine. And I think that a lot of creative people are the same in that respect. So the key for me is having a system that's flexible enough to move things around without the whole week falling apart. That's genuinely one of the reasons why batching matters so much. Because if your content is done ahead of time, you're not in a position where creating for fun has to compete with creating for content, because the content is already handled for the week or the month. So when the creative mood does hit on a random Wednesday morning or 9 p.m. when the kids are in bed, you can actually just go with it. You're not sat there thinking, I haven't filmed for this week, so I can't spend time creating. So to me, it's less about rigidly blocking Tuesday 2 p.m. as creative time and more about making sure that the rest of your week is organized enough that when the mood does strike, you actually have got a space to say yes to it. Because that's really what all these 5 shifts are building towards. Not a perfect schedule, just a week that's organized enough to let the creating actually happen. And if any of this has made you realize that the biggest thing standing between you and your creative time is just not having a proper place to hold all of the business stuff, that's exactly what I built Artova for. Just go to artova.io, or you can find the free trial linked in the description. And part 2 of this conversation, where I'm sharing my own story of losing touch with my creativity and what I'm doing to bring it back, will be linked right here as soon as it's live. So if that sounds like a journey that you want to follow and how you can apply that to your creative life, just click here to watch.